Hello and welcome to another video. This time I'm going to be talking about the Shek race. Sheks are kind of a simpler race than a lot of the other races in Kenshi, but I still thought it would be good to talk about them in their own video. They do tend to fit into the typical warrior race archetype, sort of Klingon, orc kind of thing, but they do have some interesting parts of their history, like the various factions that are trying to secede from their kingdom, and some of the ancient history about how they might be genetically augmented humans. This is part of a video series about the world of Kenshi and my tabletop adaptation of it. I've recently completed a full conversion of Kenshi into a tabletop game, which you can check out in the link in the description below. Kenshi is a post-apocalyptic world with a futuristic kind of vibe, but sort of retro-futuristic. Most of the tech is very grimy and lived in, sort of like the original Star Wars trilogy. But Kenshi, I would say, takes more inspiration from Eastern philosophy, samurai, and Western films. So it's more of like a harsh, kind of grittier setting. But it has been compared to Fallout sometimes. So it's sort of post-apocalyptic samurai fiction. I guess actually it also compares with kind of with Samurai Jack, now that I'm thinking of it. There are some parallels. Interesting. Huh. With that said, let's talk about the Sheks. Sheks don't have any sub-races, there's just one kind of Shek. Sheks are sort of blue or brownish skinned, kind of human looking, but they're covered in these armored plates and they've got these bone horns coming out of their heads. The Sheks were once called the Enforcers long ago. It's thought they might have been some kind of genetically augmented police force used by the First Empire. In the modern world of Kenshi, they have a very militaristic kingdom. It's got a very militaristic culture, and the Sheks are basically a kind of warrior, honorable race. I'd say they're kind of the orcs of the setting, but more than that, they're really the Klingons of the setting. They're always wanting to attack everyone. They've got all these different honor codes. If your horns get cut off as a Shek, you lose all your human rights. You become a slave. And there's like a lot of stigma attached to having short horns or long horns. Long horns, you're like the coolest guy. Short horns, you're a nobody. Sheks also seem to dislike singing and any kind of frivolous activity like that. They're a warrior, honorable race. They're currently going through a crisis where a lot of different parts of their kingdom have seceded and are trying to kind of claim to be the true inheritors of the legitimacy of their old kingdom. Their king was recently slain in ritual combat, and that's how the current queen, Asada the Stone Golem, became the queen of the Shek kingdom. So there's all these kind of new micro-states, and I'll put up a map showing all of them, of like random Sheks who are religious fanatics or have different ideologies than the main government, and they're all trying to compete to see who's going to be the next Shek government. Right now, it's very clearly the Shek kingdom, the one who defeated the old king, Asada the Stone Golem, since she controls most of the cities, including the capital. Let's actually talk a little bit more about each of those factions, since if you're going to be playing a Shek character, you are going to need to base your character around one of these groups. They're going to have to, necessarily be from one of them. So the first one, and really the main one, is the Shek Kingdom. And until recently, they were ruled by King Shek, who is implied to be a very traditional male Shek, very strong, great warrior. But there was essentially this huge war over the hub, which at the time was a holy nation city. And the hub is in a very central location in the world of Kenshi, so you can imagine why it would be so important, both from a trade perspective and a strategic perspective. So it seems like King Shek didn't do so well in this battle. The Sheks don't control the city these days, so, obviously they didn't win. It may also have been that losing this battle degraded his reputation such that Asada was able to kill him and take over. I think probably before this point, King Shek would not have been challenged by anyone simply out of the level of respect that he probably carried. But it's hard to say with any certainty what exactly happened. So who did win this battle at the hub? It seems like, honestly, nobody won this fight. They kind of just annihilated each other's armies, and they're still recovering from that. The United Cities was involved as well. King Shek was also intending to launch new invasions of various territories, definitely including the Holy Nation, but it also could have included the United Cities and maybe even the Western Hive. By the comments of the Holy Nation paladins, we can see that the Sheks were fighting in these wars to such a degree that they were actually going extinct. and Asada wanted to put a stop to this in order for their numbers to recover and to rebuild their cities and infrastructure, basically. It's probably on screen right now, the Great Fortress. This essentially used to be some kind of huge military outpost for the Shek Kingdom, but as you can see here, it looks pretty messed up. The Shek Kingdom is a real kingdom. They have like administrators and governors and whatnot, but they tend to have a fairly militaristic bent to them. You can think of this almost like military governors that the Byzantine Empire early on would use for its territories, the strategoi. The Sheks are kind of like that, but with a very big difference in that the strategoi of the Byzantine Empire did have training in administration, and especially as the empire went on, became a bureaucratic role, in a sense. And that's my opinion. There's many different perspectives on that, but this isn't a video about the Byzantine Empire. The difference that I'm trying to illustrate with the Sheks is that their military commanders were primarily that. They kind of just wanted to fight everything. And if Asada dies, you see a future where their ideology becomes ascendant. And there's just Sheks abandoning their cities, basically, just fighting in giant wars all the time, assumedly to extinction. Now, a species fighting itself to extinction seems unlikely in the real world. Kenshi's not the real world, so of course such things can happen. But I think more pertinently, the Sheks are likely a genetically augmented race that was used as some kind of police force by the skeletons. It is perhaps these augmentations which make it possible for them to large-scale drive themselves to extinction through such a high level of aggression. Otherwise, one would think that the Sheks would have evolved differently, since those that evolved in this super aggressive way would have died out and not reproduced. So it's likely there was some kind of large-scale population augmentation in order for them to be this way. And they may not be a sustainable species just due to how aggressive they are. So that's the Shek Kingdom, the biggest group. The next group are the Band of Bones. This is probably the most simple of the Shek breakaway factions, I would say. Like I mentioned earlier, if you have short horns as a Shek, you don't have any human rights, you're just like a slave now. The Band of Bones people all seem to have these short horns. There are two possible explanations for this. The members of the Band of Bones may have been former Shek slaves who have escaped and are now turning to banditry to support themselves, or they may simply have been short-horned individuals who were pushed to the margins by Shek society and now they can't integrate into it and so become bandits. We know Tora the Fearless's backstory, or Tora the Gutless, as the Sheks call her. She was a retainer who was ordered by presumably Asada the Stone Golem or one of her servants to take on some new kind of trade, put down her sword, give up the way of the warrior. And this is very much in line with Asada's other actions, such as trying to turn the Shek Kingdom towards a more sustainable direction. Tora seems to have been at odds with this. It's worth noting, though, that other Shek renegades are like venerable warriors who decided to leave and pursue a new life. Tora seems to have been some kind of low-ranking warrior who was already ill thought of before leaving. The next faction is Kral's Chosen. The Shek worship a god called Kral, who is a warrior god. Kral's Chosen are religious fanatics. They believe that Asada's new ideology for the kingdom is at odds with the natural order of Shek society and with the orders of Kral. Kral's Chosen, they're a group of religious fundamentalists who are also very traditionalist about Shek culture. Stop me if you've heard this one. They're led by a guy named Flying Bull. He was probably the right hand, or at least like a very high up warrior during the reign of King Shagar. He's pretty much got the goal of returning Shek society to the way it was. I don't think he really desires to be a ruler of the Shek kingdom. I don't think he wants to unseat Asada. I think he probably just wants to kill Asada and then encourage everyone to take up arms and attack the holy nation. He sees anything else as just weakness. They have their own new base called New Kralia, and they kind of just wander around the desert, killing people and attacking things, as any true Shek of the fatherland would do. It's assumed that their goal in lore is to overthrow the Shek kingdom and return it to some kind of primal warrior state, with a focus on the god Kral. The last faction is the Berserkers. The Berserkers are pretty similar to Kral's Chosen. They have less of a religious bent, I would say, focusing more on just returning to a primitive tribal society based on strength and combat. They're led by a guy called Ghost. There's kind of a meme about this guy. I think maybe Ambiguous Amphibian might have started it. But if you go and meet this guy, he's kind of just like sitting in his house and he seems pretty chill, but like he leads the berserkers, but also they're not hostile on sight, at least not the ones that are in their main camp. So you kind of get the sense that he might be like a tired old warrior, maybe, you know, giving out wisdom to people who approach him. Anyway, the berserkers are another breakaway group that wants to return to old Shek society of being a warrior and fighting people and not worrying about silly things like tax administration. We learned something pretty interesting about the berserkers and other breakaway Shek factions too when we speak to Bayan, who is the primary advisor to Isada and perhaps some kind of power behind the throne. When you ask him about the berserkers, like, why don't you go get the berserkers, take them out? He just goes, we should let them do what they will. Which is pretty interesting given that the berserkers are pretty close to the southern Shek border with the domain of the Bugmaster, one of their main enemies. It kind of seems like he's implying that they're using the berserkers and perhaps even other Shek breakaway states as kind of buffer zones between them and the Bugmaster. And who could blame them? The Bugmaster is a terrifying guy who can control the insects of Kenshi's world. In our world, this would be bad, but in Kenshi's world, this is so much worse because they're like giant skin spiders. And, well, you've heard the name skin spider now, so I'm sure you can guess that they're not a very pleasant animal to be around. So berserkers, basically a group of Sheks who reject civilization, go around looking for battle to claim honor, and follow their natural inclinations. Now that we've talked about all of the factions, let's look at what stats you get from being a Shek. Sheks get a 20% boost to strength, toughness, and melee attack, and a 20% reduction to dexterity, athletics, dodge, robotics, science, stealth, thievery, laboring, and farming. They're really good for not much more than attacking. Let's see what traits we get. I got a 2 and an 18. My short horns earn me disrespect amongst my kind. Aww. And I hope to one day become one of the 100 Guardians. The 100 Guardians are an elite force which serves Isada the Stone Golem. They're sort of like both her royal guard and her special operations unit. So this guy, you know, he dreams of one day becoming a 100 Guardian, but his horns are pretty small. This is a very classic protagonist kind of character. Gotta prove himself. As usual, thank you for watching the video. The next one will be about the skeletons. If you'd like to download my Kenshi tabletop game, you can have a look in the description and there'll be a link where you can download it for free. Thank you again for watching, like and subscribe, and I'm going to go look into the inspirations behind Samurai Jack because it really there's just a lot of parallels. Like, I never really thought about it until like I was actually recording the intro and I was like, you know, actually there's a lot of connections here. Anyway, goodbye.